Bonjour! Welcome to So French, the show about the twists and turns, intrigues and insights to all things French.
Every 2 weeks we select the best, most interesting and fascinating of French news stories, all brought to you from our studio in the heart of Paris. This week Sarah is traveling, so I'm joined by Julia Vries. We will hear more of you the next couple of episodes. Bienvenue, Julia. And my name is Stefan de Vries.
At the end of next month, Europe will go to the polls to elect a new European Parliament. We will talk to Europeans living in Paris about how they see life on the continent.
We will talk about fake news with a special guest, Jackson Webster. He's a cybersecurity consultant in Paris, and we will talk with him about fighting fake news.
And Emmanuel Macron appointed 3 new ministers this week. We will tell you who they are.
But first, just when you thought it was impossible, Paris property prices have risen even further. And it's now almost surpassing the €10,000 per square meter barrier. So even in the most shabby neighborhoods, you have to pay over €10,000 for a tiny apartment. And in the more chic neighborhoods, you pay almost €15,000. So that's a lot of money, and it's about an 8% increase compared to last year's prices. And over the past 10 years, houses in Paris became 62.5% more expensive. So, Julia, it's almost impossible to buy an apartment or a house in Paris. Is renting them maybe a solution?
Well, renting is actually not a cheap solution either. Real estate agent Log Service brought out a report this week, and they said that 31 square meter studio in the capital is now officially higher than €1,000, and that's double the average rental price outside of the Paris region.
Wow, okay. And what's the chicest or the most expensive area in Paris?
Well, that would be the 6th arrondissement around Odeon. And the cheapest is the 19th around La Chapelle.
Yeah, that's in the north of the city. And Odeon is, of course, in the heart of the city. A very nice neighborhood indeed. And what you see is that people who used to live in the center now go more away from the center because it's less expensive. But then they, make it more expensive, of course. And that's, every time people go further away from the city center, and it becomes more and more expensive even around the city. So yeah, that's almost a ripple effect, of course. Why is it so expensive in Paris? I mean, of course, Paris is very attractive and world famous and many museums, but it seems much more expensive than other European cities.
Well, many people also blame the shortage of new housing being built actually in Paris. And some also blame the Brexit because rich people look for alternatives to London. And a while ago, there was the most expensive Parisian apartment was sold for €39 million, also by an industrial tycoon who wanted to leave the UK because of the Brexit uncertainty.
So Brexit is to blame. Now, you're originally from Amsterdam. Is Paris an exception, or is housing also very expensive there? And what about other European capitals?
Well, in Amsterdam, it's also the case that prices get higher and higher. But it's still comparatively cheap. Well, I wouldn't say cheap, but to Paris, because it's around 6,000. And that's about the same as in Stockholm and Vienna, which are also 2 popular cities in Europe, of course. And it does get more and more difficult in Amsterdam to find something, especially as a student.
So yeah, Paris, Amsterdam, Stockholm, very expensive. But so where should you go if you have no money? What are the cheapest cities in Europe?
Well, Warsaw is pretty cheap, and so is Budapest in Hungary. There it is about €2,000 per square meter. But the most affordable capital is Sofia, capital of Bulgaria, where it is only €1,000 per square meter. So that means you can buy a 100 square meter apartment for the same price as a 9 square meter studio in Paris.
Wow, that's a huge difference as well. So if you have some money to spare, either invest it in Paris if you have a lot of money, and if not, you have to go to Sofia, also a nice city. It's not Paris exactly, but nevertheless. And let's see, ever-rising housing prices in Paris. Now it's time for a special section of our show. So fake. There was a lot of fake news this week, or at least a lot of happened this week in the fake news arena. Like, for instance, that police has tried to fight fake news circulating on social media about attempted kidnappings by Roma people, and they led to real-life violence. These rumors and fake news on Facebook, Twitter and Snapchat, false rumors were being spread about Roma trying to abduct children in white vans.
Yeah, and they even led a group of people with knives and sticks to attack a Roma encampment in the Parisian suburb of Bobigny. The police has arrested 20 people and has tried to combat the false reports on social media itself. And in at least 6 other suburbs, Roma have also been chased or attacked. And yes, it's weird. Since at least 2010, an online hoax has circulated in France about a white van allegedly used in kidnappings.
Yeah, but there are no white vans. It's just not true.
Yeah, it's weird. But people believe it because actually the social media posts also use pictures even, which create more impact, of course.
Yeah, so pictures of white vans, but it's just random vans.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Very strange story, but it's very serious because it led to a lot of violence this week. And even though the police said it's all not true, they still have to protect the Roma, right?
Yeah, and they even called for all-round protection as well by the police. To discuss all that, we have a special guest this week. It's Jackson Webster. You're an expert in cybersecurity based in Paris. And you work at Legal Cluster, which is a legal startup in Paris.
Yeah, welcome, Jackson. Now, Jackson, how come people seem to believe everything they read online, even to such an extent that they turn to real violence and even act on these rumors?
I don't think that everyone necessarily believes everything they read on the internet. I think it's an issue of what sources are trusted and what sources are not. And I mean, the issue with especially a platform, the platforms that are growing right now, Snapchat, WhatsApp, etc., is that these are places where the stuff you're going to be receiving is going to be from friends or friends of friends or neighbors or people in your community. It's the same kind of basic trust model that local journalism used to rely upon, before the market was essentially captured by these social media platforms. And so there's an issue of do I believe this piece of, what is ultimately fake news that was shared by, let's say, my neighbor or my neighbor's friend or whatever, or do I believe the report from some random government official or from, some prefecture somewhere or from a national newspaper, who I might think is out of touch with my community, right? That's essentially the problem that we're running into here.
Yeah. Now, French lawmakers, they proposed an anti-fake news law. They want now to change that proposition already to ensure that posts like these are quickly removed. How hard is it to regulate hate speech, or even, well, in this case, it's fake news. How hard it is to regulate it?
I personally, I mean, this might just be a sort of American opinion because of the First Amendment sort of mentality,
yeah.
But personally, I don't buy the regulate away the fake news. I mean, for one, if we're really going to talk about the spread of disinformation, I mean, this is not a new phenomenon. No. It's just, like all things that have been happening on social media, it's an issue of scale, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, bullying wasn't something that was created by Facebook, but, online bullying is all of a sudden so much easier with social media platforms and with the platformization of pretty much everything. So for me, the legislative approach is problematic because in the end, if you're going to pass a law, it's all well and good to say, oh, let's pass a law to, ban fake news that might incite violence or et cetera. But at the same time, that also involves sort of implicit questions such as, what is fake news, right? Because there can also be news that is an opinion which you might believe is an incorrect opinion, but which is based, ultimately on fact. And there is room for legitimate political disagreement on the definition of what fake news means. And what disinformation means, and even what hate speech means, right? And so I think those are some of the sort of boundaries of that approach that you're running up against when you're trying to legislate this away.
Yeah, it's a good point, because this week actually the French government seemed to have spread, or at least Macron, fake news himself, using an anonymous account, Pierre Le Texier. He's from Macron's e-influence division. So there's already inside the government there's a division that's trying to influence people. He distributed a tweet with 2 videos, and they were actually about the famous Benalla affair. It was actually a made-up video retrieved from the police illegally. So this shows that even the government themselves, they are using, or trying to manipulate the truth. So,
at the same time in the United States, I mean, President Donald Trump regularly refers to reports that he doesn't like as fake news. And I mean, this is a constant trope of authoritarian figures around the world. In the same way that after the attempted coup d'etat in Turkey in 2016, I mean, Erdogan went around and shut down pretty much all of the independent newspapers. The government basically bought them out and then shut them down. So again, the issue with making the government the ultimate arbiter of what is and isn't, fake news in the end is that this term can be weaponized fairly easily, in the same way that, for example, terrorism, can be weaponized, in the same way that, that internal security actors in Europe and the United States might legitimately, use this term to refer to people that they're, who violent attacks they're trying to stop, which ultimately is a good thing for security. At the same time, the Ukrainian government has often been accused of stretching the term and sort of referring to, the anti-terrorist operation, right, as their military operation in the eastern part of the country. And
so governments can use the argument of fake news actually against spreading real news.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, again, if we retake the term, the term fake news, they can often be used in the same way that the term terrorism can be used, or terrorist can be used to sort of delegitimize any actor that might be opposing the state. I mean, this is the classic language of state security. I mean, and the sort of extreme example would be the Assad government in Syria, which has described not only the legitimately labeled by the UN terrorist organizations opposing the government as terrorists, but has also labeled, the Free Syrian Army and the Kurds as well as quote unquote terrorists. And we can take this to any number of examples. I mean, with, for example, the Russians and the Chechens in 2004, or, and that labels like this can be dangerous if ill-defined, because there leaves room for political exploitation.
Yeah. And then the question of who defines these rules. Well, in general, it will be the government. Now, France has a lot of laws against the freedom of expression, or that actually limit the freedom of expression and freedom of opinion. But it seems that the French, they are fine with that. Even this new fake news law, there was not a lot of debate about it. Do you think the French are maybe less free, or they don't attach the same value to the freedom of expression as other European countries? Or
I think there's sort of 3 answers there. The first one is the obvious historical legacy of where that limitation on speech comes from, which is a post World War II reaction to anti-Semitism, which obviously is a particular historical heritage that other countries like the United States, for example, don't necessarily have. But sort of on the other hand, I think that in general, there is a natural response within French politics that whenever there is an issue, it is the responsibility of the state to legislate it away. That's essentially the reflexive reaction of the political system here. And then, sort of onto the third point, I think that, for example, there's a saying about the French, that they demand, many rules for their society, and also demand the right to break them occasionally. And it is, this kind of bizarre tension between being, both sort of a Mediterranean, quote unquote Latin civilization, but in Northern Europe. And I think that manifests itself in exactly this discussion where, I wouldn't necessarily say that France is particularly restrained in terms of how people express themselves here any more than anywhere else in Europe would be, but more that there is that sort of baseline reaction that, oh, there's a security problem, or, oh, there's a social problem.
Let's make a law.
Exactly. That's the immediate reflex.
Now, the interesting thing this week was that the French government was also an advertiser this week, or they wanted to be an advertiser. They wanted to publish a campaign for the European elections on Google and Facebook. But Google and Facebook took the new law literally, and they just said, no, we don't want this advertisement because it's a political campaign and it's fake news. Now, do you think that Twitter and Facebook and the other platforms take the French new law too literally, or are they just afraid to make any mistakes? Because the French government says, yeah,